Alright, you guards, templars and mercenaries. Today, we talk about my experience with the demo and I will talk a little bit about my opinions, and at the very end I have some exclusive information, so make sure to watch until the end. So fortunately, I was able to make it to the Gamescom, and after around 3 hours waiting in line, I was finally able to play the Gothic Remake. Since I am but a small YouTuber, I only had 15 minutes to play just like the rest of the fans, and I wasn't able to record the game. The material that was shown was the Nyrus demo that is a bit older at this point. Months ago it was given to certain journalists to get an early view. However, this demo was upgraded to be on par with the actual remake itself, with many changes implemented. Someone explained it as the old demo on steroids. Yet again, please differentiate. The old demo doesn't mean the playable teaser from all the years back. This one is gone. This is a new demo, and once again it was upgraded. So now the question what the Nyrus demo actually is. In this demo you play as Nyrus, the crazed novice who in the original game was tasked to retrieve the focus stone for the Brotherhood. Driven mad by the Sleeper's influence, he then perished at the hands of the nameless hero. I really do like that they give a seemingly random NPC a little backstory and use him for this occasion. I think this is very valuable for world building. The area that you play in is the general area of the mountain pass, including the exchange zone, the canyon between the abandoned mine shafts, the upper plateau, and the very beginning of the path leading into the valley itself, which is blocked by boulders. This is roughly the same area that the playable teaser used for its purposes. The demo gives you an overview of the general gameplay, combat, exploration, NPC interaction, albeit on a very basic level due to the size of the area, but it is a good enough insight into the remake. Now I will give you my opinions and my experience playing it, but before, a little disclaimer. I am very bad at getting things done under pressure, and since I had an appointment with a certain person, I couldn't play the full 15 minutes. Because of that, I failed to test a few things to the full extent. With that said, let's go. Okay, so while checking the control options, I found out that you will be able to throw items. This was and still is possible in the original game, but the gameplay element itself was missing. If I remember correctly, the intention behind this was to attract or distract certain animals. For example, if you want to pass a certain area but wolves are in your way, you can throw a piece of meat to run past them. Maybe it will be possible to distract human NPCs as well, but that remains to be seen. Your quest log is way more elaborate and you can follow certain quests. I thankfully didn't see any quest markers, so it might be just like an option to keep you focused on whatever you plan to do, like a sticky note. During the dialogue, the camera sometimes changes angle for a more cinematic approach akin to The Witcher 3, with a little handheld camera effect giving you the impression that you observe the conversation as a bystander. And I actually enjoyed this addition, and it doesn't take away from the original experience whatsoever. The face animations are really astonishing. Seeing our beloved characters having proper facial expressions is really wild. My first point of criticism might be the pickup animation. The character's animation looks like he is waving over the object you want to collect, and I'm not a big fan of it. Even the clunky animations of the original did a better job at conveying this, since it had a certain weight and preciseness to it. When cooking or frying meat, you have the quality of life change to prepare multiple meals at once, so sitting down for 10 minutes just to get a few pieces of meat is indeed a thing of the past. The exchange zone, like I described in my last video, is not as big and industrial as in the playable teaser, but definitely larger than in the original, and I think it has the perfect size. There is a hut, a campfire, a movable crane, many crates and packages, giving off the impression that this is indeed a very busy place. And in the demo, Diego and Whistler, the guy who has a fable for ornamental swords, are guarding the lift, and they look really good. After that, I needed to cool off and took a swim in the lake in which the newcomers are usually thrown into, and swimming and diving feels really good. Especially diving was a pain in the original, but that is a thing of the past. Movement in water feels smooth and you can even pick up stuff underwater. The water effect or textures or whatever, they felt a little bit off and I expected some more visual fidelity. After that, I went straight for the canyon, and to my surprise, the gods of Alchemia fulfilled one of my many wishes. The abandoned mine is implemented into the game. Cut content is accessible in the remake. You can find some goodies in there and it looked and felt fantastic. The classic mine soundtrack was missing, however, but that is just a nitpick. The atmosphere inside was great. Since I didn't pick up a torch yet, it was very intense and the ore seams glowed, illuminating the tunnels. In general, the landscapes looked very beautiful and they captured the spirit of the original mostly very well. While standing on the plateau above the mines, I could see into the distance and it seemed that some models were not updated because Xardus' tower looked a little bit different from the material that we saw in the gameplay trailer from the showcase. The river just below the plateau had no water in it, and the footbridge connecting the central plain with the eastern forest led over an empty riverbed. I think this was a bug as well. When I took a peek into the distance, I saw the mountain fortress, and it seems like its main tower grew in size quite a bit, just like the old citadel seems to have been expanded. One thing that is immensely adding to atmosphere in games, in my opinion, is the skybox. The original one added a very certain feel to the game. Its orange, almost golden aura sprinkled with light blue always reminded me of an afternoon setting. This changed quite drastically with the color palette being more blue, but given the fact that I only played at a certain time of the day, this might change. However, I really hope that the old feeling will make a comeback and that we are once more able to experience the Valley of Mines bathed in soothing, warm and cozy colors. Some movements of the player character were a little bit distracting. When running but then changing into a different direction, the movement slowed down and the character was affected by inertia. Sure, this is way closer to real-world physics compared to the original, but still, it kind of felt off. I can see me getting used to it, but it was definitely a change that I did not expect. A very cool addition was how the character handles torches. Once you pull your weapon, the character throws the torch into the ground and it sticks there, illuminating your surroundings while in the dark. In the original, you just dropped it and the light effect was restricted, but now you can use your source of light to its full potential. Now to one of my biggest criticisms: jumping and climbing. I was very concerned about these things, as you might have heard in my other videos, and to be honest, I am not really sold by the system in place. How it works? Low obstacles, when approached by moving towards them, will be jumped automatically. You press forward and then you will leap onto the object. Bigger obstacles, however, are different. If the developer wants you to be able to climb it, you will see the UI popping up, then you jump, grab the ledges and pull yourself up. If the developer doesn't want you to be able to climb, you simply can't. One example, I had no problems climbing up to the plateau above the abandoned mine, but when I saw a wagon at the start of the game, I jumped against it, but the character wouldn't grab the ledge to pull himself up. This is a big turnoff, and I gave my reasons in several videos. Gothic is about freedom. One rule of the world was, if there is a 90-degree surface, you will be able to climb it. This is sadly no longer the case. With that said, free-range climbing was not a thing in the demo on the Gamescom. It is up to debate if they will change this, and I sincerely hope that they will do so. An interesting thing that was also observed during the streams was a little addition to weapon descriptions, damage types. A rusty sword had edge damage, so I guess blunt damage and or pierce damage will be a thing too. These might indicate that some NPCs or monsters are especially susceptible to certain weapons. We saw something similar in Gothic 1 and 2, in which rock golems took more damage from blunt weapons. I do like this change, since it makes changing your weapon a real viable choice depending on the situation, spicing up the combat and adding another layer to it. They also changed the third-person camera. While it was centered in the old games, Gothic 1, 2 and 3, they now go for a different approach that is akin to the one that we can find in The Witcher 3, a more over-the-shoulder view. I really hope that they will change this, or at least give us the option to toggle between both styles. Another interesting addition is that you can now retrieve arrows that you shot into an animal. Sometimes they do break, but most of the time you can retrieve them and recycle them by using them again. Now let's talk a little bit about the soundscape and the music. This was a bit hard to experience since the Gamescom was very loud and the headphones didn't isolate the external sounds properly, so some things might have escaped me. Right off the bat, I was pleasantly surprised to hear the original death scream. That made me happy, and I hope it won't be a placeholder. When engaging in fights, some sounds were missing, like weapon impact sounds or drawing the bowstring. This needs to be fixed. The sound of slashing your foes in Gothic 1 and Gothic 2 to an extent was impactful and very satisfying. Ambient noises like birds, crickets, or the howling wind, I couldn't properly hear, but I don't have to mention that these are very important to set the scene. The waterfall at the exchange zone had a nice and rich sound to it, not like the silent waterfalls of Gothic 3. It was loud, but not too loud. The ambience was just right. Kai Rosenkranz's music was very fitting, and I like the crisp nature of those old tunes. The feel is a bit different compared to the original, but it is very fitting for this new approach of an old game. Kai, you are doing just a phenomenal job once again. As teased in an older podcast, the Scavengers will have new sounds which are indeed inspired by those of a goose. If you have ever encountered these evil birds and their toothed beaks in real life, you will probably get some horrifying PTSD. Another thing that was on my wishlist was granted yet again, different accents. But I have to say that the voiceover of the demo might not be finalized. Things might change in the future, even though I actually really liked it. While most characters that you meet in the demo, Whistler, Ori, Radford and Drax have English accents, Kirgo, the arena fighter from Gothic 1, can be found at the very end of the map, and he has an Indian accent matching his new appearance. Diego had more of an American accent, if I'm not mistaken. I really like these additions, combining the real life with the game. This is diversity done right, it is not forced, it fits, and it is also a part of the world building, which leads me to the next subject. Let's talk a little bit about lore. As you can probably guess, there won't be too much lore in a short demo, but some hints give me a lot of hope for the release version. First off, I have to praise the writing of the dialogue. It has a rough undertone, which isn't exaggerated like in Gothic 3, and they don't put swear words into the game just for the sake of it. It simply fits the nature of being in a prison colony. During the dialogues, some NPCs give you some insight into their lives. Kirgo, for example, is from Varant and lived in Khorinis for 4 years and had a woman called Rosa. These small details won't get rid of Gothic's mystery like so many people said on one of my videos. These things make the world richer and more believable. I don't want to know every single detail about Kirgo's life, but he had a very friendly personality in the original. Him now speaking of his past love just adds layers to his character, and I'm really up for it. Midland of Myrtana was also mentioned in Ori's dialogue, and these bits and pieces are crucial to the world building and were mostly absent in the original game, but that is due to the fact that they didn't have concrete plans for the series moving forward. It all developed on the go, so to speak. Now that the devs know about all those different islands and continents and faiths, it is way easier to integrate them into the game. Moving on to the user interface. The UI for crafting is not too distracting in my opinion. It has more or less a clean look, but some artistic additions were definitely made. The quick slot bar with 8 slots, I think, is a good quality of life addition to the game, in my opinion, once again, since it was, albeit in a very basic form, part of the original game, even though not really visible. The interface for picking up items is a bit distracting, I have to say. In the original, when taking an item into focus, the whole item is brightened just a tiny bit without taking away from the immersion. The remake gives items a white cartoonish outline and showing an E button next to it for picking it up, and I'm not a fan of this. The hints for climbing are still a thing, which I'm also not really fond of. Due to limited time, I couldn't find out if I would be able to turn off or adjust the UI, so that remains to be seen. Now to the hit or miss gameplay element that I dreaded to experience: combat. First, I have to say, I can barely report anything about the AI. From my observations, the creatures, namely mole rats and scavengers, weren't idling around too much, so that is pretty faithful to the original. Once in aggro range, mole rats chased me around when I tried to make my escape. The combat feels better than in the playable teaser, but it is very much different from the combat system of the original 2 games. It felt a bit wonky and clunky, and I tried to explain it with only being a beginner in fighting, not having learned any combat whatsoever. However, I knew that one was able to learn the next level for one-handed weapons from Kurgo at the end of the map. The animations were faster once I learned it, and they looked more professional, but it still felt a little bit off, like the attacks were too delayed. Even as a rookie fighter wielding a slow pickaxe in the original, once you attack, the swing comes in swift and controlled. Sure, you cannot chain attacks properly and the combos were only containing 2 moves, but it felt like you're in full control. I didn't have this feeling in the demo. So even though we players cursed the directional combat a la For Honor of the playable teaser, well, we always had directional combat in Gothic 1 and 2. With that said, I now know what they meant when they said that the new combat will be inspired by the old one. The left mouse click and you swing to the left, the right mouse click and you swing to the right. So directional attacks will be once more part of the combat system. Additionally, I tried to parry or backstep, but I failed to figure it out. One thing that the original did also very well was putting an enemy into focus when you are close enough. Once focused, you could strafe around with keeping the enemy centered. Due to time constraints while playing in the booth at the Gamescom, I couldn't figure out more, but was told later on that another button on the keyboard would let you strike forward to chain your attacks into combos, and that there was indeed a parry or backstep option. However, I am not sure if focusing an enemy was a thing. Still, I felt that this aspect of the game desperately needs to be more polished. Even though I'm a big fan of the combat system in Gothic 1 and 2, which combines mouse and keyboard, I could see me getting used to this system, but only if the swings of the weapon will be faster and more controlled. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, and now we get to the juice. To the meat, the nectar of the gods, so to speak, the exclusive information. These pieces of intel come from 100% trustworthy insider source, which I unfortunately cannot disclose. So, these pieces of information are a little bit random, but give you a good insight on what is to come. So, right at the start, I was told that the engine was once again updated to the Unreal Engine 5.4 not that long ago, and the process was yet again very successful. I was talking about the abandoned mine earlier, and I'm totally glad that they implemented a piece of cut content, but damn, it hit me like a truck when it was confirmed that this dungeon will indeed be bigger in the final release of the game. If they will take more inspiration from the original layout remains to be seen, but hey, I'm all up for it. Then I had a question about crouching. Please don't mistake this crouching as the stealth movement. No, I'm talking about the crouching of the playable teaser. And they said it won't make a comeback. So I, like all the other people on this world, I despise the playable teaser for what it was, but I think this was one of the very few elements that I really like to be expanded on. But, you know, it is what it is, and we won't see it in the final release of the game. In the last podcast, the developers teased something happening in the rice fields of the new camp, and I wondered what it might be. Many people speculated about new structures like a mill or something, but I, like the rest, were wrong. The Rice Lord will now be inheriting a higher position in the new camp, and with that comes an appropriate abode. I guess we will see some kind of makeshift mansion for the Overseer. In the original, he slept in a rather small adjacent building to the storage room. These changes, however, will make sense since he was one of the original founders of the new camp and came up with the idea of farming rice, which then became a pillar of the new camp's food supply. Now we're moving on to the Ulu Mulu, the standard of respect in the Orcish culture. This time around, it will serve as a key item, not in a literal sense, and there won't be a need to have it equipped, so once you crafted it, you're granted the respect among the orcs, and you can move freely, equipping your favorite weapons. Staying with the orcs, the city of the orcs that I criticized heavily because it was just too small to be called a city, will be expanded on and is henceforth known as the Enclave of the Orcs. Also taking inspiration from the very early concepts from the Orpheus and Phoenix documents, the early project names of Gothic, more interactions with orcs are going to take place, but to what extent is unknown to me since my source didn't want to spoil too much. The only time we come in contact with orcs and have a non-violent encounter is with Orshak and Tarok, both eager to help us. The original idea in the early version of the game was to learn the Orcish language to communicate with the Green Furs, with additional quests taking place and strengthening the interaction between the Nameless and the orcs. If they are going to realize it just like it was planned more than 2 decades ago remains to be seen, but it surely leaves enough room for speculation. We're moving on to professions, and smithing and alchemy will require the player to go through different crafting steps, just like in the original. At the forge, you need to heat the blank steel, work on it with a hammer, cool it down in some water, and then sharpen the blade. This process obviously takes time, but it won't break immersion like in so many other games. How this process will translate onto alchemy, I am not sure, but since we saw a lot of different flasks on the alchemy desks, I can see that brewing potions will take some effort. While other professions like cooking will have quality of life changes, these aforementioned actions won't be affected by them. In other terms, you won't be able to forge 20 swords at once, and that, in my opinion, is a good decision. One thing that I criticized earlier was the inertia seen while running, and that is due to a technique that is called motion matching. This process will chain certain actions that were motion captured together in a logical way to give it another layer of realism. So they had somebody running around in circles and turning and changing directions, and that is what these techniques basically recorded, and that is why it looks that way. But yeah, again, I can see me getting used to it, so yeah. But it is nice to know what the story behind it is. It is called motion matching. Very interesting. And since my very first video that I did on this channel, I had a question that was burning in my mind regarding two-handed swords and how the hero would hold them. So, two-handed swords won't be held like in Gothic 3, sideways, with one hand on the shaft, one hand on the blade, but also not quite upright like in Gothic 1 and 2. That made me think of Dark Souls and Elden Ring, where the hands hold bigger swords at the shaft, but the blade rests on the shoulder, and I can definitely see that happening in the remake. Speaking of weapons, every weapon type will have a different animation, so maces, swords, axes and other types will have different movesets. One thing that is on my mind almost daily is the soundtrack for the Sleeper Temple, and I got confirmation that it is still unfinished. So yeah, work in progress does also affect the music and not just the orc design, for example, like I discussed in my last video. Speaking of orc design, orcish weapons will be useful this time around, but my source couldn't go into more detail. It could be that they have a bonus effect while fighting, or that they are simply very strong, or something else that I couldn't figure out. So some people were complaining about missing animal sounds, but I was told that this was due to a bug that encountered in the actual demo. The idea was to diversify the animal sounds, including the taunt scream a monster gives off as a warning before attacking you. I got confirmation that the scavenger will have goose sounds, but will also retain its iconic primal chicken sound from the original. Praise Lord Jesus, I mean Innos. People who played Gothic 1 and Night of the Raven know about a certain connection between the Valley of Mines and Jarkandar. And I got told that a certain architecture will be incorporated more thoughtfully. I give you a hint, focus stones. Take a look at the gameplay trailer again and you will see what I mean. Another very important thing is a bit of information about the 3 camps and their guilds. The ranks one can possibly achieve in the remake will be the same as in the original game from 2001. Then I was assured that many UI options will be adjustable. You can play with almost no UI visible, very minimal UI that only pops up when needed, like the mana bar in Gothic 1 and 2, or a more elaborate interface. Then I was asking about Xardis' tower being visible, and they said, yeah, this is actually intentional. And that might have some lore implications, but I'm not sure how they will play out. Obviously, they didn't want to spoil me. The last subject concerns a lot of people on the official Gothic Discord server. The gods. They will actually take a backseat in the remake, not like in Gothic 2 or 3 where they played a very prominent and important role. They won't be absent, but if you expect the War of the Gods being a full-blown thing, I have to disappoint you. For me personally, it is the best decision and a faithful one at that. When I was asking about certain gods who evolved to very stereotypical deities, I was assured that they will have more layers to them. Even though the statement was pretty vague, I think they are on a good path and know that painting things black and white might be not the best course. The most satisfying way to reintroduce some of the old concepts might be to present those as morally grey and inject Gothic with more mature and nuanced themes. So, what is the conclusion? What is my verdict? To sum it up, so far, so good. It was a very pleasant experience overall, and I liked many of the changes. The expanded exchange zone, the implementation of cut content, free aiming, the ranged combat felt great, the animations and facial expressions, the music, the dialogue, the additional background information about certain characters, the overall feel and atmosphere. These things were pretty awesome, and I really had a blast staring into the distance on top of the mountain plateau, figuring out which new adventures might arise in this place that we all know so damn well. But it is not all sunshine and butterflies. My biggest fears kind of got confirmed. Fears that I expressed multiple times in every other video that I made. Jumping and combat needs to be worked on. As I explained, combat lacks the punch of the original and the attacks feel too delayed. The punch could be fixed with a more prominent sound, since the monsters already recoiled quite a bit when hit, and that was actually pretty good. Jumping and holding on to ledges which have a 90-degree surface is an absolute must. People love the game because it gave you so many options to traverse the landscape, to climb onto buildings and much more, and I don't want to give it a miss in the remake. It was an integral part of the original, and without it, I feel like I am caged. It is a weird feeling, I know, but I really need to make the point that getting rid of certain gameplay aspects in a remake is not the way. Remember that you could climb the mountains at the very start and make your way to Quentin's camp in the northern mountains. You should expand on the mechanics that were already in the game, not leaving them out. Sure, you can climb certain areas, but only where you are supposed to, and that goes against Gothic's main philosophy. Sure, you can say, this is but a menial and nitpicky thing to criticize, but it is damn important to my personal expectations, and I know that other fans feel the same. So, I hope that you had some good insights into the demo, and I thank you all for listening. You guys are the MVPs on this channel. I also want to thank Koga, the German Gothic streamer, for giving me some valuable tips. Man, it was so nice to chat with you, and it was also great to see so many people being passionate about the game, the guys that I waited in line with, sharing the pain of waiting, exchanging ideas, and having a great deal of fun. I also want to express my heartfelt appreciation to my sources, which I unfortunately cannot disclose. If you guys watched this video, I want to thank you once again for taking your time to answer some questions of a very small YouTuber like myself. I won't forget our get-together. With all this said, I wish all of you beautiful people a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, awaken.